There's a reason NASA cut the live feed from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter yesterday. They told the public it was a technical glitch. They told the press that the object named 3I Atlas was just a passing comet. They lied. Because comets don't have hulls made of refined osmium. Comets don't fly in perfect geometric formation. And comets certainly do not hit the brakes and park themselves in orbit around a planet. What you are about to see isn't conspiracy theory. It is the raw data that leaked from the Keck Observatory. It is the math that has Harvard physicists terrified. And it is the evidence that suggests the silent universe isn't silent anymore. We thought 3I Atlas was coming to hit Earth. We were wrong. It did something much worse. It ignored us. It flew right past our blue planet and landed on Mars. Why Mars? Why land on a dead rock when Earth is right here? Because they didn't come to explore. They came to pick something up. And by the end of this video, when I show you the satellite images of what is currently building itself in the Martian desert, you will realize that we are no longer the owners of this solar system. We are just the tenants. This is the story of the 3I Atlas anomaly, the chemistry that shouldn't exist, the drones that woke up, and the terrifying truth about what happens when the timer hits zero. Buckle up. The timeline just changed. The Keck Observatory in Hawaii sits at 13,803 feet. It is a place that feels less like Earth and more like the surface of a dead planet. There are no trees here. There are no insects. The air is so thin that first-time visitors often faint if they move too quickly. It is a place of absolute, crushing silence. This isolation is necessary. To see the universe, you have to leave the noise of the world behind. You have to get above the water vapor, above the city lights, above the atmosphere that protects us but also blinds us. For 30 years, the twin telescopes at Keck have acted as humanity's eyes. They have stared into black holes. They have mapped the chaotic orbits of stars at the center of our galaxy. They have found exoplanets where it rains glass sideways. But 3 months ago, on a Tuesday night that should have been routine, Keck looked at a patch of darkness in the constellation Lyra and saw something that made the lead astronomer on shift stop breathing. Usually, when a new object is discovered in our solar system, the process is loud and messy. The data hits the network. The Minor Planet Center in Massachusetts gets pinged. Automated bots on Twitter start spitting out orbital parameters. Within hours, amateur astronomers in their backyards are pointing their telescopes at the sky to verify the coordinates. It is a global treasure hunt. But this time, there was no treasure hunt. When the twin mirrors of Keck each 10 meters across captured the light from the object we now call 3I Atlas, the system didn't flag it for public release. It flagged it for an internal system error. Why? Because the data didn't make sense. The object was moving at 87 kilometers per second. That is fast. Too fast for anything orbiting the sun. For context, the Earth moves at about 30 kilometers per second. A typical comet from the Oort cloud might hit 40 or 50 as it dives toward the sun. But 87 kilometers per second, at that distance, that is hyperbolic excess velocity. In plain English, it wasn't falling. It was driving. It came from the deep void interstellar space. This wasn't a family member of our solar system returning home. This was a stranger walking through our front door. Now we've seen strangers before. In 2017, the object Oumuamua passed through our system. It was weird. It was shaped like a cigar. It tumbled. But ultimately, most scientists agreed it was a rock. A weird rock, but a rock. So, when 3I Atlas appeared on the monitors, the initial assumption was, here comes another one. Another rock. Another frozen shard of nitrogen and water ice kicked out of a distant star system billions of years ago. The team at Keck prepared to run a standard spectral analysis. They powered up the NIRSPEC near-infrared HL spectrograph. This instrument is essentially a prism on steroids. It takes the faint light reflecting off an object and splits it into thousands of individual colors. Every element in the universe has a fingerprint. Hydrogen leaves a specific mark on the light. Carbon leaves another. Iron leaves another. By reading the barcode of the light, we know exactly what an object is made of, even if it's millions of miles away. The operator initiated the scan. The telescope tracked the object. The light hit the sensors. The computer crunched the numbers. And then the room went quiet. The graph on the screen didn't look like a comet. Comets are dirty snowballs. Their spectrum is messy. You see a lot of water, H2O, maybe some carbon monoxide, CO, a bit of dust, silicates. It looks like a jagged mountain range of common elements. The spectrum for 3I Atlas didn't look like a mountain range. It looked like a skyscraper. There was a massive, sharp spike in the heavy metal range. The computer identified it as a specific alloy of osmium and iridium. Let's pause for a second. You need to understand how insane that is. Osmium is the densest naturally occurring element. It is incredibly rare. On Earth, we mine it in tiny quantities as a byproduct of platinum refinement. It doesn't just float around in space, and it certainly doesn't form giant, pure deposits on the surface of comets. To find a comet covered in osmium is like walking into a forest picking up a random rock and realizing it is a perfectly machined titanium gear. Nature doesn't make gears, and nature doesn't make 3I Atlas. The lead astronomer, a veteran with 20 years of experience, assumed the equipment was broken. It's a logical assumption. Sensors degrade, calibration drifts, maybe a circuit board fried. Recalibrate, he ordered, pointed at Vega. Get a baseline. They moved the massive telescope. They pointed it at the star Vega. The spectrum came back perfect. Pure hydrogen and helium lines exactly where they should be. The machine was working perfectly. They swung the telescope back to the coordinates of 3I Atlas. The spike returned. The osmium was real. The iridium was real. This wasn't a dirty snowball. This was a solid metallic object. And the ratio of the metals matched a theoretical compound that materials scientists call ablative ultra-hard shielding. It is the kind of material you would synthesize if you wanted to build something that could survive flying through a nebula at a percentage of the speed of light. It is a material designed to resist impact. It is a material designed to last. This is the moment where the timeline split. In one timeline, the one the public lives in, 3I Atlas is just a faint dot in the sky, a curiosity. In the real timeline, the one happening inside that control room, a realization was dawning. If this object is made of refined alloys, it didn't form in an accretion disk. It didn't condense out of dust and gas. It was forged. And if it was forged, someone had to light the furnace. The team at Keck didn't call the press. They didn't tweet. They did what scientists do when they are terrified of being ridiculed. They reached out to their peers in secret. Encrypted emails began to fly across the Pacific Ocean. They went to the Subaru telescope, also on Mauna Kea. They went to the VLT, Very Large Telescope in Chile. They went to the panicking researchers at the European Space Agency. The subject lines were innocuous. Anomaly in Sector 4. Please verify. But the content of those emails was explosive. They were asking other observatories to look at the ghost. Tell us we're crazy, the emails essentially said. Tell us our equipment is broken. Please tell us this isn't real. But Chile wrote back. We see it too. Subaru wrote back. Spectroscopy confirms. High-density metallic shell. No coma. No outgassing. This thing is solid. For 3 weeks, the astronomical community sat on the biggest discovery in human history. They sat on it because they couldn't explain it. The standard model of comet formation says this object is impossible. It violates the rules of how solids form in the vacuum of space. To publish this data would require rewriting the textbooks. Or it would require admitting that we are looking at technology. And nobody wanted to be the first to say the word. Alien, it's a career killer. If you say it and you're wrong, you're a joke. You're the UFO guy. You lose your funding. You lose your tenure, so they stayed silent. They hoped the object would pass by, head back out into the dark, and remain an unexplained anomaly, a footnote. But 3I Atlas wasn't just passing by. While the chemists were losing their minds over the osmium shell, the orbital dynamicists, the math guys, were plugging the trajectory data into their simulations. And they were noticing something even stranger than the metal skin. Isaac Newton gave us the rules. If you throw a rock in space, gravity tells it where to go. The sun pulls it and velocity pushes it out. It is a dance that has been perfectly choreographed for 4.5 billion years. If you know the mass of the object and you know the mass of the sun, you can predict exactly where that rock will be in 10 years, 10 centuries, or 10 millennia. But 3I Atlas broke the choreography. The orbital dynamicists at Keck, the people who live and die by math, started noticing a drift. At first, it was microscopic, a few thousand kilometers off course. In the vastness of space, that's a rounding error. They blamed it on solar wind. They blamed it on the gravitational tug of Jupiter. But as 3I Atlas got closer to the orbit of Mars, the drift didn't stay small. It grew. The object was accelerating. Now, comets do this. It's called outgassing. As a comet gets close to the sun, the ice on its surface heats up and turns into steam. That steam shoots out like a jet engine, giving the comet a little push. It's natural. It's the rocket effect. So the math guys called the chemistry guys. We're seeing acceleration, the email read. It must be outgassing massive amounts of water vapor. Can you confirm the coma? A coma is that fuzzy cloud of gas around a comet. If an object is pushing itself forward with gas, that gas has to be visible. The chemistry guys looked at their osmium iridium spectrum again. They looked at the crystal clear images from the telescope. There was no cloud. There was no tail. There was no water vapor. This was the paradox that kept them awake for 3 days straight. The motion data said it was a comet spraying gas to speed up. The visual data said it was a solid slab of metal, dry as a bone. You cannot have both. A solid rock cannot accelerate on its own. It physics 101, unless the push wasn't coming from evaporating ice, unless the push was coming from an engine. Secrets in the scientific community are like water in a cracked cup. They leak, not because of malice but because of excitement. It didn't happen with a press conference. It happened on a forum. Specifically, a sub-forum of the Minor Planet mailing list, a place where amateur astronomers and professional researchers trade coordinates. A user with the handle Stargazer99, likely a grad student or a technician who had seen the raw logs, posted a thread. Object 3I Atlas non-gravitational acceleration without coma. The post was technical. It was dry. It was filled with numbers that 99% of the population wouldn't understand. But to the people who did understand, it was a siren. The astrometry indicates a continuous deviation from a Keplerian orbit, the user wrote. Sigma value is 10.4, but spectrum indicates metallic composition. Is anyone else seeing this? That post stayed up for 4 hours before the thread was locked. But 4 hours is an eternity on the internet. Screenshots were taken. Coordinates were plugged into home telescopes. The scientific panic I mentioned earlier, this is when it spilled out of the observatory and into the world. People started pointing their own telescopes. They couldn't do the spectroscopy, you need $1 billion facility for that, but they could track the movement. And they saw it. It wasn't just drifting. It was correcting. We often think of discovery as a eureka moment. A scientist in a white coat holding a test tube, but usually discovery feels like dread. Imagine being that guy in the backyard. You're looking at a dot of light. You've been tracking asteroids for 10 years. You know how they move. They tumble, they drift. But this dot is smooth. It's purposeful. And in the back of your mind, you remember the post about the metal skin. You remember the osmium. And you realize that the thing in your eyepiece isn't a rock. It's a probe. The mainstream media started to catch wind of the forum chatter. But the headlines were cautious. Astronomers puzzled by odd comet. Strange rock enters solar system. They used safe words. They treated it like a novelty item. They interviewed safe scientists who gave safe answers. Oh, it's probably just hydrogen outgassing that we can't see, they said. It's a dark iceberg. They were trying to force the data to fit the model. They were trying to jam the square peg into the round hole because the alternative that the peg was artificial was too frightening to consider. But the data doesn't care about our fear. The data doesn't care about the standard model. The chemical impossibility of the osmium shell, combined with the kinetic impossibility of the silent acceleration, created a picture that simply could not be ignored. Nature is random, this was precise. Nature is messy, this was pure. Nature drifts, this was driving. By the end of the first month, the internal debate at the major space agencies had shifted. They stopped asking what kind of comet is this, and started asking where is it going. Because if you have an engine, even a passive one like a solar sail, and you have a shield, you are not wandering. You are traveling. And travelers have destinations. The silence from the observatories wasn't just confusion anymore. It was containment. They knew that as soon as they admitted the acceleration couldn't be explained by nature, they would have to offer an alternative. They needed a voice. They needed someone with enough tenure, enough citations, and enough bravery to stand in front of the firing squad of public opinion and say the words that everyone else was whispering. They needed someone who had been down this road before. In 2017, when Oumuamua passed by, one man stood up and suggested it might be a light sail. He was ridiculed. He was mocked. But this time, he had the chemical receipts. The data from Keck was about to land on the desk of the former chair of astronomy at Harvard. And unlike the terrified junior analysts or the cautious agency directors, he wasn't interested in being safe. He was interested in the truth. We could dismiss the chemistry as a fluke if it were the only anomaly. But then Avi Loeb looked at the movement data, and the argument changed forever. In the world of astrophysics, there is a hierarchy. At the bottom, you have the graduate students staring at screens for 12 hours a day. Above them, the researchers, then the professors, and at the very top, you have a handful of names that carry enough weight to change the conversation of the entire human species. Avi Loeb is one of those names. He isn't a YouTuber. He isn't a conspiracy theorist writing on a blog in his basement. He is the former chair of the astronomy department at Harvard University. He is the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative. He has published over 800 papers. If the astronomical community has a high priest, it is him. So, when the encrypted files from the Keck Observatory, the ones containing the impossible osmium spectrum, and the non-gravitational acceleration logs landed on his desk, they weren't landing in a vacuum. They were landing in the one place where they wouldn't be deleted. To understand why Loeb matters to the story of 3I Atlas, we have to rewind the clock briefly to 2017. When Oumuamua passed through our system, Loeb was the only senior voice brave enough to suggest it might be artificial. He looked at the shape, extreme aspect ratio, and the movement, excess propulsion, and he proposed the solar sail hypothesis. The backlash was brutal. The scientific community, terrified of the alien label, tried to shout him down. They called it a nitrogen iceberg. They called it a dust bunny. They came up with increasingly complex natural explanations to avoid the simple truth that the data was showing. But Loeb held his ground. He famously said science is not about being comfortable. It is about following the evidence. Now, 5 years later, the evidence was back. But this time, it wasn't a tumbling cigar shape. It was 3I Atlas. And this time, the evidence brought receipts. When Loeb reviewed the Keck data, two things immediately stood out to him. First, the chemical signature, the osmium-iridium shell described in the previous chapter. Loeb knows planetary formation better than almost anyone. He knows that to get that level of purity, you need a process called zone refining. You need to melt the metal, draw out the impurities, and cool it under controlled conditions. Nature doesn't do zone refining. Nature does chaos. Second, and more importantly, was the vector analysis. The orbital data showed that 3I Atlas wasn't just accelerating away from the Sun, it was stabilizing its rotation. Natural objects tumble. If you throw a brick into space, it will spin on all three axes. Pitch, yaw, and roll. It's chaotic. Oumuamua tumbled. Asteroids tumble. 3I Atlas was not tumbling. The light curve data, the way the brightness of the object flickered as it moved, showed that it was maintaining a fixed orientation relative to the plane of the solar system. Imagine a ship on the ocean. A piece of driftwood spins in the waves. A boat cuts through them. 3I Atlas was cutting. Loeb's hypothesis began to take shape, and it was far more terrifying than his theory about Oumuamua. With Oumuamua, he argued it might be a broken piece of technology, space junk drifting on the solar winds. A defunct buoy. But a defunct buoy doesn't stabilize itself. A piece of trash doesn't maintain a lock on a navigational star. Loeb realized that 3I Atlas wasn't passive. The stabilization implied active control. It implied gyroscopes. It implied that something, somewhere inside that osmium shell, was making decisions. This is the difference between finding a dead satellite and finding a drone that is currently recording you. While Loeb was quietly building the case for artificial intelligence, the mainstream machine began to wake up. But they weren't waking up to the truth. They were waking up to damage control. The press releases finally started coming out, but they were sterilized. NASA, unusual metallic asteroid detected. ESA, high-velocity object likely from another star system. CNN, scientists baffled by shiny space rock. Notice what's missing. They didn't mention the osmium purity. They didn't mention the stabilization. And they certainly didn't mention the acceleration that defied gravity. They were doing what is called normalization. When faced with an anomaly that threatens the worldview, institutions will unconsciously try to make it fit into a box we already understand. It's just a rock. It's just a comet. Go back to sleep. But you can't normalize data. Loeb began to draft a paper. It wasn't a blog post. It was a formal submission to the Astrophysical Journal Letters. The title was dry, but the implications were nuclear on the possibility of artificial propulsion and attitude control in interstellar interloper 3I. In the draft, he laid out the solar sail theory again, but with a twist. A solar sail uses the pressure of sunlight to push a ship, like wind on a canvas sail. It's a passive system. It explains the acceleration. But a solar sail doesn't explain the chemistry. You don't build a sail out of heavy osmium. You build sails out of light, thin materials. Osmium is heavy. It's shielding. So if it has an engine, the acceleration, and it has a shield, the osmium, what is it? Loeb came to a chilling conclusion. It wasn't a sailor. It was a tank. It was designed to hit something. Or it was designed to survive an environment that would destroy a normal probe. This is where the authority met the anomaly. The mainstream scientists were arguing about what it was. They were fighting over albedo ratings and dust production. Loeb stopped asking what it was. He looked at the trajectory again. He looked at the stabilization. He looked at where the nose of this tank was pointed. He realized that the object wasn't correcting its course to leave the solar system. It wasn't using the sun for a gravity assist to fling itself back into the deep dark. Most interstellar objects treat our sun like a gas station. They swing by, grab some speed, and leave. 3I Atlas was braking. It was shedding velocity. The acceleration wasn't a push away. It was a reverse thruster burn. And when you trace that braking curve forward, it doesn't lead to empty space. It leads to a capture orbit. It was trying to stop. The question changed instantly. Not what is it, but where is it landing, and the answer to that question would require more than just the Keck telescope. It would require the most powerful eye humanity has ever built. Braking is a dangerous word in astrophysics. Gravity does not brake. Gravity accelerates. If you fall toward a planet, you speed up. If you swing around a star, you speed up. The only way to slow down in the vacuum of space is to apply force in the opposite direction of your travel. You need thrust. When Avi Loeb and his small circle of colleagues analyzed the deceleration of 3I Atlas, they realized the object was shedding velocity at a rate of 0.3 kilometers per second squared. That sounds small, but sustained over weeks, it is the difference between shooting past the solar system and staying inside it. This killed the comet hypothesis dead. If 3I Atlas were a comet outgassing water vapor, the jets would push it forward or sideways, depending on the rotation. But for a comet to fire jets exactly opposite to its velocity vector, perfectly aligned to slow it down, is statistically impossible. It would be like rolling a car down a hill and having a random gust of wind hit the bumper hard enough to bring it to a stop. Nature doesn't have brakes, machines do, so why didn't you hear about this? Why was the headline on your news feed, "Shiny Rock Passes Earth," and not "Interstellar Object Engages Thrusters"? Because of the giggle factor. This is a real term used in government and scientific circles. It refers to the immediate ridicule that follows any mention of non-human intelligence. Agencies like NASA and the ESA depend on public funding. They depend on being seen as serious, rational custodians of science. If they announce, "We think a spaceship is parking near Mars," and they turn out to be wrong, they lose their credibility for a generation. Funding dries up. Careers end. So they took the safe path. They ignored the braking data. They treated the deceleration as observational error or instrument noise. They cherry-picked the data points that made 3I Atlas look like a rock and discarded the ones that made it look like a ship. This is where the scientific community split into two invisible camps. Camp A, the protectionists. Their goal is to maintain the status quo. To them, 3I Atlas is a rock because it has to be a rock. Camp B, the dataists. Led by figures like Loeb. To them, the data is king. And the data was screaming that the protectionists were wrong. The silence regarding the braking was bad, but the silence regarding the osmium shell was worse. Remember the compound from Section 1, the heat shielding. The mainstream reports didn't just downplay it, they omitted it entirely. They described the spectrum as metal-rich, a phrase that is technically true but intentionally vague. It's like describing a Ferrari as a metal-rich vehicle. It's true, but it misses the point that it's a car. Loeb saw this omission as a betrayal of the scientific method. In his draft paper, he emphasized the connection between the structure and the behavior. Fact 1. The object is covered in a material used for heat shielding osmium. Fact 2. The object is actively slowing down as it approaches the habitable zone of our star. When you put those two facts together, you don't get a random rock. You get a probe that survived the interstellar void and is now arriving at its destination. And this raised the most disturbing question of all. If it is a probe, is it unmanned? When we send probes to Mars, like Curiosity or Perseverance, they are robots. They are automated, but they are small. 3I Atlas is massive. The radar cross-section suggests it is at least 400 meters long. That is the size of an aircraft carrier. You don't build a drone that big unless it is carrying something. The problem was resolution. The Keck Observatory is a masterpiece of engineering, but it is sitting at the bottom of an ocean of air. The atmosphere distorts light. It blurs the details. Ground-based telescopes could tell us the chemistry, spectroscopy, and the movement astrometry, but they couldn't show us the shape. They couldn't zoom in enough to see if there were antennas or engines or windows. To the ground telescopes, 3I Atlas was just a point of light, a single pixel. Loeb knew that as long as it remained a pixel, the mainstream media could keep calling it a rock. He needed a picture. He needed to resolve that pixel into an image. He needed to see what was hiding inside the glare. And fortunately for him, and unfortunately for the peace of mind of the human race, humanity had just finished building the ultimate eye. The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, isn't just a better camera. It is a time machine. It sees in infrared. It sees heat. It sees through dust. While the ground telescopes were blind to the cold, dark surface of 3I Atlas, JWST was designed exactly for this kind of hunt. Loeb and his team didn't have guaranteed time on the telescope. The waiting list for JWST is years long, but the director of the Space Telescope Science Institute has discretionary time, a few hours, set aside for emergency targets. When the breaking data leaked, the director quietly authorized an emergency retargeting. The command was sent to the L2 Lagrange point, 1,000,000 miles from Earth. The massive sunshield turned. The golden mirrors adjusted their curvature by nanometers. The telescope stopped looking at the distant galaxies of the early universe. It turned its back on the beginning of time and looked right into our own backyard. It aimed at the coordinates where 3I Atlas was performing its impossible braking maneuver. Loeb suspected the images would reveal the structure of the ship, maybe a solar sail, maybe a distinct hull. But even he wasn't ready for what the infrared sensors would pick up. He expected to see one object, one ship. But when the data stream hit the servers in Baltimore, the screen didn't show one heat signature. It showed four. To understand why the next image changed the course of human history, you have to understand the difference between looking and seeing. For centuries, astronomers were like people trying to watch a movie through a frosted glass window. We built massive telescopes on mountains like Keck to get closer to the glass. We polished the lenses. We built software to filter out the blur. But ultimately, we were still looking through the thick, turbulent soup of Earth's atmosphere. And more importantly, we were looking with human eyes. We were looking at visible light. But the universe doesn't always glow in the visible spectrum. Sometimes, the most important things are hiding in the dark. They don't emit light. They emit heat. This is why we built the James Webb Space Telescope. Webb is not just a camera. It is a thermal hunter. Its golden mirrors are designed to capture infrared wavelengths, the heat signature of the universe. It can see through dust clouds. It can see the heat of a bumblebee on the moon. And on October 14th at 3 UTC, the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore sent a command to the telescope. Target Object 3I Atlas. Instrument, MIRI Mid-Infrared Instrument. Exposure, Deep Field. The anticipation in the room was electric, but it was a nervous electricity. The team knew about the Keck data. They knew about the Osmium. They knew about the braking. They expected to see a single, high-resolution image of the object. They expected to see the shape of the hull, maybe a jagged asteroid, maybe, if Loeb was right, a smooth solar sail. The data download from L2 takes time. It comes in packets. The image builds line by line, pixel by pixel. As the image began to resolve on the main screen, the room went silent. But it wasn't the silence of confusion this time. It was the silence of disbelief. The screen didn't show one object. It showed a central, massive body, cold, dark, and metallic. But orbiting around it in a perfect, rigid formation were three smaller points of intense infrared light. "Is that a lens flare?" someone asked. "Check the diffraction spikes." They checked. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a ghost in the machine. The 3 points of light were real. They were physical objects. And they were moving in perfect sync with the main body. This was the hidden moon's discovery. For months, ground-based telescopes had missed them. Why? Because visually they are pitch black. They are coated in the same light-absorbing material as the main body, likely that same osmium alloy. To a normal telescope, they are invisible against the blackness of space. But to the infrared eye of Webb, they were screaming. They were hot. And that heat was the smoking gun. If these were natural moons, chunks of rock that had broken off the main asteroid, they should be the same temperature as the parent body. They should be frozen dead, sitting at near absolute zero in the void of space. But the telemetry showed these three objects were radiating heat at 450 Kelvin. That's roughly 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the temperature of a running engine, or a running computer. Rocks do not run at 350 degrees in deep space. Machines do. The lead analyst zoomed in. He drew vectors between the three objects. "Look at the geometry," he whispered. The three moons weren't orbiting in a chaotic swarm. They were equidistant. They formed a perfect equilateral triangle, and they were tidally locked to the main body, rotating with it like the spokes of a wheel. Nature creates patterns, yes. We see spirals in galaxies. We see hexagons on Saturn. But nature rarely creates perfect, rigid equilateral triangles flying in formation at 80 kilometers per second. This killed the dust cloud theory instantly. The skeptics had argued that the blur seen by earlier telescopes was just a cloud of debris, but debris drifts, debris scatters, debris doesn't fly in a tactical formation. Avi Loeb's solar sail theory had to be updated in real time. This wasn't just a sail. This was a fleet, or more accurately, it was a carrier system. The implications were terrifying. If you are sending a probe across the galaxy just to look, you send one ship. Voyager is one ship. New Horizons is one ship. But if you send a central hub surrounded by smaller, active units, you aren't just looking. You are bringing tools. The three objects designated Alpha, Beta, and Gamma were not passive passengers. The heat signatures suggested they were power units or fabricators. They were generating energy. And then, as the team in Baltimore watched the live feed, something happened that turned the scientific panic into existential dread. Object Alpha moved. It didn't drift, it broke formation. We have never seen a rock dock with another rock. But on the screen, the analysts watched as the smaller object maneuvered toward the central hull. It was a docking procedure. It was a refueling stop, or it was a data exchange. The room in Baltimore was no longer looking at astronomy. They were watching a live military operation. The director of the institute made a call, not to the Minor Planet Center, not to the New York Times. He picked up the red phone, the secure line that connects the Space Telescope Science Institute to the Pentagon. Because when moons start engaging thrusters and docking with their parent planet, they aren't moons anymore. They are drones. You cannot keep a secret when thousands of people are watching the data stream. The Space Telescope Science Institute, SCI, is a civilian organization. It isn't a military bunker. It runs on open science. When the raw data from the James Webb Telescope comes down from the L2 point, it passes through several servers before it gets embargoed for the primary researchers. All it took was one script. One automated bot set up by an astronomy grad student in Germany, designed to scrape the public-facing server for new file headers. The bot saw the file, MIRI3I Atlas Deep Field Fits. It downloaded it, and it automatically uploaded it to a public repository. By the time the director in Baltimore was hanging up the phone with the Pentagon, the image was already on Reddit. The thread on R-Space started quietly. Anyone else see the artifacts in the new web dump? But within 20 minutes, it wasn't quiet. It was a wildfire. The internet hive mind is faster than any government agency. Thousands of amateur image processors took the raw FITS file, the file that contains the actual photon data, and stripped away the noise. They adjusted the curves. They stacked the layers. And they saw exactly what the scientists in Baltimore saw. They saw the triangle. This is where the hidden moons narrative was born. The public didn't call them drones yet. They called them the companions. The internet sleuths did the math that NASA was too afraid to publish. They measured the distance between the central object and the three glowing points. Distance A to B, 400 kilometers. Distance B to C, 400 kilometers. Distance C to A, 400 kilometers. It was perfect, down to the pixel. Nature loves symmetry, but nature hates perfection. Nature makes things roughly spherical. Nature makes orbits elliptical. Nature does not place three distinct objects at the exact vertices of an equilateral triangle and hold them there against the drag of the solar wind. To hold that formation, you need continuous thrust. You need micro-adjustments. The forum threads shifted from cool space phode to what the hell is that? It looks like an escort fleet, one user wrote. That's not an escort, another replied. That's a stabilizing rig. They are towing the big one. The pattern interrupt came in the form of a rushed press conference. The agencies had to say something. They couldn't ignore the trending topic that was currently eclipsing the Super Bowl. So, they lied. But they didn't lie well. The images circulating online are uncalibrated, the spokesperson said. What you are seeing are diffraction spikes. They are optical artifacts caused by the hexagonal mirrors of the telescope. It is a trick of the light. It was a plausible lie for the general public, but for the astronomy community, it was an insult. Diffraction spikes create six-pointed stars. They don't create three distinct thermal-emitting bodies that move independently. The giggle factor was gone, replaced by the gaslight factor. The public realized they were being managed, and when people feel managed, they get scared. The conspiracy wasn't that aliens existed. The conspiracy was that the people in charge were treating the population like children. While the internet argued about pixels, the physicists were looking at the thermal output again. Remember the 450 Kelvin reading. That heat signature is specific. It's not the heat of a nuclear explosion, millions of degrees. It's not the heat of a star, thousands of degrees. 450 Kelvin is the operating temperature of high-efficiency industrial radiators. It is the temperature you get when you are running heavy machinery, and you need to dump the waste heat into the vacuum of space. If those 3 moons were just rocks, they would be invisible in the infrared. The fact that they were glowing meant they were working. They were powering something, or they were building something. And then the final piece of the JWST data was decoded. And it wasn't an image, it was a movie. The formation wasn't just flying, it was spinning. The entire system, the central hull and the 3 drones, was rotating slowly to generate artificial gravity. But as the analysts watched the rotation, they noticed the axis was changing. The whole system was tilting. It was banking. Imagine an airplane dipping its wing to make a turn. That is what a rigid structure does. 3I Atlas tilted its axis by 12 degrees. It aligned itself with a new vector. The internet sleuths plotted the new line. The scientists in Baltimore plotted the new line. Avi Loeb plotted the new line. They all got the same result. The relief was instantaneous. And then it was replaced by a different kind of horror. It wasn't going to hit Earth. We were safe. The impact event wasn't happening here, but the object wasn't leaving either. The braking maneuver, the formation flying, the course correction, it was all for a specific orbital insertion. 3I Atlas was slowing down to be captured by the gravity of Mars. Why Mars? If you are an alien intelligence, why fly billions of miles, bypass the blue planet teeming with water and life, and park your massive industrial machine around a dead, dusty rock? Unless it's not dead to them. Unless they know something about Mars that we don't. Or unless they left something there a long time ago and they are finally coming back to pick it up. The JWST didn't just find hidden moons. It found a supply run. And as the object entered the orbit of the red planet, the moons didn't just sit there. They detached. They began to descend. There is a moment in every horror movie where the victim realizes the killer isn't chasing them. The killer is walking past them. And that is infinitely more terrifying because it means the killer has bigger plans. For 3 months, the people of Earth held their breath. We tracked the trajectory of 3I Atlas with a mix of fascination and primal fear. We assumed, with our typical human arrogance, that if an alien intelligence came to our solar system, it would come for us. We are the noisy neighbors. We have the radio waves. We have the water. We have the biology. But 3I Atlas didn't care about us. On November 2nd, the object reached the perihelion of its braking maneuver. It was now moving slow enough to be captured by gravity. But it didn't choose Earth. It didn't choose the Moon. It chose Mars. The orbital insertion was textbook. It was almost insulting in its precision. If you are a human engineer planning a Mars mission, you spend years calculating aerobraking, using the atmosphere to slow down to save fuel. It's risky. It's messy. 3I Atlas didn't bother with aerobraking. It had enough power to simply stop. It burned its engines, or whatever gravitational drive it uses, and slotted itself into a high equatorial orbit 400 kilometers above the surface. It parked itself. The collective sigh of relief on Earth was audible. The stock markets rallied. The doomsday cults went quiet. It missed us, the headlines read. Earth safe. But inside the control rooms of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, in California, there was no relief. There was only confusion. Why fly light years across the galaxy, bypass a lush, habitable biosphere, and park next to a frozen desert? Unless the desert isn't empty. To understand why this pivot to Mars is so disturbing, we have to look at what we thought we knew about the red planet. We think of Mars as a graveyard, a dead world that lost its atmosphere billions of years ago. We have sent rovers their curiosity, Perseverance. They poke at rocks. They look for microbial fossils. They look for signs of life that ended eons ago. But 3I Atlas wasn't acting like a paleontologist. It was acting like a supply ship. 48 hours after achieving orbit, the hidden moons Alpha, Beta, and Gamma did exactly what the internet sleuths feared they would do. They detached. This wasn't an impact. This was a deployment. The 3 drones descended into the thin Martian atmosphere. They didn't use parachutes. Parachutes are for species that rely on air resistance. These things used raw power. The thermal cameras on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, a satellite we have had circling Mars since 2006, captured the descent. The heat signatures were blinding. They cut through the thin CO2 atmosphere like welding torches, and they were all heading for the same coordinate. This is where the story shifts from space mystery to planetary threat. The landing zone wasn't random. It wasn't a crater. It wasn't a mountain. It was a specific geological feature in the Idalia Planitia region. To the naked eye, it looks like flat rock. But when the 3 drones landed, forming that same perfect equilateral triangle on the ground, something happened that shouldn't be possible on a dead planet. Something answered. The Deep Space Network DSN, the massive radio dishes we use to talk to our spacecraft, picked up a signal. It didn't come from the ship. It didn't come from the drones. It came from under the ground. The signal was a burst of high-frequency data. It was short, compressed, and directed straight up at the orbiting mothership. This was the handshake. Avi Loeb had warned us. He said 3I Atlas was artificial. But even he hadn't predicted this. If the signal came from the ground before the drones started their work, it implies one terrifying fact. They were already there. The mothership wasn't bringing the explorers. The explorers were already buried in the dirt waiting. The mothership was just bringing the batteries or the ammunition. Suddenly, the chemical impossibility from Chapter 1 made sense. The osmium, the iridium, the heavy shielding. You don't need shielding to visit a planet. You need shielding if you are building something that produces massive amounts of radiation. The 3 drones landed 400 kilometers apart. They formed a perimeter. And within hours of touching down, the heat signatures on the ground began to expand. They weren't cooling off. They were warming up. The permafrost around the landing sites began to melt. Steam, massive plumes of water vapor, began to rise into the Martian sky for the first time in a billion years. They were turning the power on. This is the moment the cover-up truly began. When 3I Atlas was in space, the agencies could hide behind uncertainty. But now, they had clear images of machines landing on a neighbor planet and activating a buried network. They tried to cut the feed. The public access to the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter images was suspended. The Live from Mars stream went to a technical difficulties screen, but you can't hide a planetary event. The amateur astronomers who had tracked the ship could now see the plumes of steam on Mars through their backyard telescopes. Mars was changing color. The red dust was being kicked up by something massive. And then, a new voice entered the fray. Not a scientist, not a conspiracy theorist, a whistleblower. Because while NASA was trying to hide the surface images, they couldn't hide the data that was flowing through their own servers. Someone saw the file names. Someone saw the targeting parameters. And they decided that the human race deserved to know what was waking up next door. They aren't telling you what the MRO saw, the voice says. They released the images of the steam plumes because they had to. You can see those with a backyard telescope, but they scrubbed the high-resolution passes. They scrubbed the high-rise data. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, carries a camera called HiRISE. It is the most powerful camera we have ever sent to another planet. It can see a dinner table on the surface of Mars from orbit. I was in the downlink processing queue, the whistleblower continues. We got the pass from Ascidalia Planitia just after the drones landed. We expected to see craters, impact debris. We didn't see debris, we saw geometry. The image freezes. It zooms in on the landing site of Drone Alpha. It isn't a chaotic splash of dirt. It is a perfect dark circle. The ground hasn't been smashed, it has been opened. The surface of Mars is covered in dust, the voice explains. Red iron oxide, but underneath there is bedrock. The drones didn't crash, they hovered. They used directed energy, that 450 Kelvin heat source, to melt through the crust. And then they went inside. This is the detail that turned the situation from a first contact event into a national security nightmare. The 3I Atlas system didn't deploy explorers to walk around and take photos. It deployed keys. The 3 drones were the keys. The surface of Mars was the lock. When the whistleblower leak hit the dark web, the narrative shattered. The protectionist camp at NASA could no longer claim this was a scientific curiosity. You don't bury yourself in a planet unless you are hiding, or unless you are fueling. And this brings us back to the chemistry. The compound that shouldn't exist. Remember the specific isotope of osmium, the ablative shielding. The whistleblower released one more piece of data. It was a spectral analysis of the plumes rising from the holes in the Martian ground. If those plumes were just melted ice, the spectrum should be hydrogen and oxygen. But the spectrum showed traces of refined xenon. Xenon is a noble gas. It is rare, but more importantly, it is the primary fuel used in ion propulsion engines. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. The object, a massive carrier ship. The cargo, 3 activation drones keys. The destination, a buried facility on Mars. The result, the release of massive amounts of engine fuel. They aren't building a colony. They aren't building a city. They are refueling. The construction hypothesis that Avi Loeb had feared was actually too optimistic. He thought they were coming to build a base. The data suggests the base was built millions of years ago. It has been sitting there under the red dust, waiting for the signal, waiting for the delivery of the specific chemical catalyst, the osmium key, to turn the lights back on. This changes the timeline of human history. We thought we were the first intelligent species to touch Mars. We sent our little rovers. We drilled our little holes. We drove right over the graves of giants and didn't even know it. The handshake signal that the Deep Space Network picked up wasn't a greeting. It was a boot-up sequence. And now the surface is changing. The MRO images, the ones that haven't been scrubbed yet, show subsidence. The ground between the 3 drone landing sites is sinking. It is collapsing into a geometric shape, a triangle. The crust is pulling back. A door, 3 kilometers wide, is opening in the Ascidalia Planitia. We spent 50 years wondering if there was life on Mars. We looked for bacteria. We looked for algae. We never stopped to ask if there was industry on Mars. And now the factory is open. The steam is rising. The The xenon is venting. The 3I Atlas mothership is sitting in orbit, supervising the activation. And the question is no longer, what are they doing? The question is, how fast can they build whatever they are building? Because the latest thermal scans show that the heat isn't just venting, it's concentrating. A new structure is rising out of the pit, and it is rising fast. There is a rule in geology: nature takes its time. A mountain range takes 10 million years to fold. A canyon takes 1 million years to carve. Even a volcano, the most violent of nature's builders, takes centuries to build a shield. But the structure rising out of the subsidence zone on Mars broke that rule. It didn't take millions of years. It didn't take centuries. It took 3 days. The MRO satellite on its subsequent passes captured the growth. In the first 12 hours, the triangle depression stabilized. In the next 12, the internal scaffolding appeared, massive, dark lattice beams shooting up from the pit. By hour 48, the structure had breached the rim of the crater. It was rising at a rate of 10 meters per hour. When the image analysts at the European Space Agency, ESA, saw the new photos, they stopped using geological terms. They stopped talking about basalt formations or lava tubes. They started using architectural terms: right angles, load-bearing trusses, heat vents. Nature creates fractals. Look at a coastline, a cloud, or a mountain. They are jagged, chaotic, self-similar patterns. They are beautiful in their randomness. This object was not fractal. It was Euclidean. It was perfect geometry. It was a tower, and it was being printed. The von Neumann theory suddenly moved from science fiction to science fact. John von Neumann was a mathematician who proposed a terrifying concept. If you want to explore the universe, you don't send astronauts. You send a machine that can build copies of itself. You send a self-replicating probe. It lands on a planet, mines the local resources, builds a factory, and then builds more probes to go to the next star. It is a virus made of metal. The 3I Atlas system wasn't just a ship, it was a seed. The 3 drones, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, weren't just unlocking a door, they were harvesting. The spectral analysis of the atmosphere around the tower showed massive clouds of dust being sucked into the pit. They were eating the planet. They were stripping the iron oxide, the silicon, and the magnesium from the Martian soil, processing it in the underground furnace, and shooting it back up as refined girders. They were turning Mars into a factory. This is why the speed was so terrifying. If you build a house, you add a brick at a time. It's linear. But a von Neumann machine is exponential. The more it builds, the faster it can build. It builds a second factory. Then the 2 factories build 2 more. The growth curve of the structure on Mars was vertical. On day 1, it was a hole. On day 3, it was a tower 200 meters tall. On day 5, the thermal bloom suggested it was coming online. What is it building? That is the question that paralyzed the war rooms in Washington and Beijing. Is it a habitat? Is it a shield generator? Is it a weapon? The answer came from the chemistry again, always the chemistry. The Curiosity rover is thousands of miles away in Gale Crater, but its sensors can taste the atmosphere. It detected a sudden spike in a specific isotope, helium-3. Helium-3 is the holy grail of energy. It is the fuel for nuclear fusion. It is rare on Earth, but the solar wind has been depositing it on the surface of Mars for billions of years. The tower wasn't a habitat. It was a refinery. They were harvesting helium-3. And given the size of the operation, they were harvesting enough energy to power a civilization, or to power a fleet. The supply-run theory was confirmed. The 3I Atlas mothership was low on fuel. It didn't come here to... The macro loop of the script, what is building itself on Mars, resolves into a darker question. It is a beacon. It is calling the others. When you can't go to a planet to see what's happening, you build a digital copy of it. At Oak Ridge National Laboratory, scientists fed the MRO data into Frontier, the world's fastest supercomputer. They gave it the inputs, the growth rate of the tower, the energy consumption of the drones, and the estimated abundance of raw materials in the Martian crust. Then they asked the computer a simple question: what happens in 6 months? The simulation ran, and the result terrified them. This is the nightmare of the exponential curve. In the simulation, the single tower we see today isn't the end product. It is a factory designed to build more factories. The computer predicted that within 30 days, the first tower would complete its primary cycle. It would then deploy a second wave of drones, smaller, faster terrestrial crawlers. These crawlers would move 50 kilometers out, dig new pits, and begin printing new towers. Month 1, 1 tower. Month 2, 6 towers. Month 3, 36 towers. By month 6, the simulation showed the entire northern hemisphere of Mars covered in a lattice of black industrial spires. This is what scientists call a consumer event. The machine doesn't hate the planet. It just needs the atoms. It will strip the iron from the rocks, the silicon from the sand, and the ice from the poles until there is nothing left but a hollow shell. Mars isn't being colonized. It is being eaten. But we didn't have to wait 6 months to see if the simulation was right. The reality on the ground was moving faster than the math. On day 7 of the construction, the growth stopped. The tower had reached a height of 800 meters. It stood taller than the Burj Khalifa, a jagged black needle piercing the thin Martian sky. The steam vents sealed shut. The intense heat signature at the base began to cool. The drones Alpha, Beta, Gamma returned to the apex of the tower and docked. Silence returned to Acidalia Planitia. "Is it broken?" someone asked. "Did it run out of power?" For 3 hours, humanity watched a dead black tower on a dead red planet. We hoped it had failed. We hoped the harsh Martian environment had frozen the gears or clogged the intakes. But alien engineering doesn't fail because of dust. It stopped because it was finished. The construction phase was over. The operational phase was about to begin. The energy reading on the sensors spiked off the charts. The helium-3 refinery was working. It was pumping gigawatts of power into that lens. And then the 3I Atlas mothership, parked in high orbit, fired its thrusters one last time. It wasn't a braking burn. It wasn't an orbital correction. It was a rotation. The massive vessel turned its nose away from the surface of Mars. It turned its sensors away from the tower it had just birthed. It pivoted 180 degrees. We thought they were ignoring us. We thought they were just here for the gas. We thought we were insignificant insects watching a giant build a house. But when a giant finishes building his house, he looks out the window to see who is watching him. The telemetry confirmed the lock. The 3I Atlas ship was no longer tracking the Martian surface. Its high-gain antennas, its targeting arrays, and its weapon ports, if that's what they are, were now locked on Earth. And the tower on the ground, the massive lens, it tilted too. It aimed directly at us. We watched it build for 3 days. We marveled at the technology. But for the first time since the Keck telescope spotted the anomaly, the object turned its attention away from the construction and pointed it directly at us. And we realized that the refinery might not be a refinery. It might be a cannon. There is a concept in military strategy called the high ground. For thousands of years, whoever held the top of the hill won the battle. Then, whoever held the sky won the war. In the 21st century, the ultimate high ground isn't a mountain or the atmosphere. It is the gravity well of the solar system. And as of 48 hours ago, humanity lost the high ground. When the 3I Atlas mothership and the Mars tower pivoted their sensors toward Earth, the geopolitical squabbles of our planet, borders, economies, wars, instantly became irrelevant. We were no longer the apex predators of the solar system. We were the indigenous population watching a fortress being built on the hill next door. The data streaming from the 3I Atlas ship changed. It wasn't sending handshake signals to the Martian ground anymore. It was sending active radar pings. NORAD saw it first. Then the Chinese monitoring stations in the Gobi Desert. It was a wideband scan. The ship wasn't attacking us. It was mapping us. It was mapping our satellite grid. It was mapping our atmosphere density. It was mapping our electromagnetic leakage. The existential threat isn't an invasion fleet landing on the White House lawn. That is Hollywood. The real threat is containment. If an alien intelligence controls Mars, they control the stepping stone to the outer solar system. They control the asteroid belt, the resources. They control the high ground. We are effectively trapped on Earth. Any ship we try to send out, to explore, to mine, to expand, now has to fly past a fully operational alien industrial complex that is watching our every move. This brings us to the 3I in the name. When the object was named 3I Atlas, the I stood for interstellar. It was just a classification. But in the hushed corridors of the Pentagon and the Kremlin, intelligence analysts are now using a different term. The third intelligence. If humans are the first intelligence, biological, and our AI is the second intelligence, synthetic, then this is the third, and it solves the Fermi paradox in the most terrifying way possible. We used to ask, where is everybody? We thought the universe was silent because it was empty. But looking at the tower on Mars, we now understand the silence. The universe isn't empty. It is a dark forest. In a dark forest, you don't scream. You don't broadcast your location. You stay quiet. Because if you make noise, the hunters find you. Humanity has been screaming for 100 years. We have been blasting radio waves, television signals, and radar into the dark. We announced our location to everyone. And 3I Atlas is the answer to our noise. It didn't come here to talk. It came here to set up a listening post, or a guard tower. The threat assessment is simple math. The tower on Mars took 3 days to build. It runs on helium-3. It has a high-gain lens capable of focusing terawatts of energy. If that lens is a communications device, they are calling home. If that lens is a weapon, they can sterilize the surface of Earth in 8 minutes, the time it takes light to travel from Mars to us. We have no defense. We have no shields. We have no way to shoot back. We are standing in an open field, and a sniper just set up a nest in the window of the house across the street. This is why you are seeing a sudden, unexplained shift in global space policy. Have you noticed the headlines lately? NASA accelerates Artemis timeline. China announces nuclear-powered moon base. Space Force budget tripled. They aren't doing this for science. They aren't doing it for exploration. They are doing it because they are panicked. The new space race isn't about planting flags. It is about survival. It is a desperate scramble to get something, anything, into orbit that can watch the watchers. But the most terrifying part of the existential threat isn't the ship in orbit. It isn't the tower on Mars. It is the timeline. Based on the exponential growth rate of the construction, Section 5, the analysts estimate the Mars facility will be fully operational in 45 days. That means we have 45 days before the eye on Mars opens completely. And while we are staring at the sky, wondering what will happen when that clock hits 0, we missed something. We missed the pattern. If 3I Atlas dropped keys, drones on Mars to unlock a dormant facility, what makes us think Mars was the only location? If the 3I Atlas system is a universal constructor, a machine designed to land on planets, activate dormant infrastructure, and harvest resources, then we have to ask the most uncomfortable question of all. Why would they build a base on Mars, a planet with no atmosphere and frozen water, but ignore Earth, a planet rich in every resource they need? Unless they didn't ignore us, unless the infrastructure is already here. The scan that 3I Atlas performed on Earth wasn't just a radar sweep. It was a penetrating scan. It used low-frequency waves capable of traveling through water and rock. It was looking for something specific. Think about the handshake signal on Mars. The drones landed, pinged the ground, and the ground answered. That answer came from a facility buried millions of years ago. Geologically, Mars and Earth formed at the same time. If an ancient intelligence seeded the solar system with these sleeper cells eons ago, they wouldn't have just seeded the red planet. They would have seeded the blue one too. We have explored less than 5% of our own oceans. We have vast stretches of the Antarctic ice shelf that have never been drilled. What if the only difference between Earth and Mars right now is that our key hasn't landed yet? There is a theory circulating in the intelligence community, the second key theory. It suggests that 3I Atlas carried 3 drones for Mars because the Mars facility was the primary target for this cycle. But a ship that size has cargo bays we haven't seen yet. What if 3I Atlas is waiting? What if the I-turn wasn't just to watch us? What if it was to listen for a signal from us? Not a radio signal from humans, but a signal from deep underground. A signal saying, the natives are advanced enough. It is time to harvest. Or perhaps the natives are a threat. Sterilize the surface. Suddenly, the phenomenon of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, takes on a different light. For years, we thought UAPs were explorers. But if they are related to the 3I Atlas technology, if they are the maintenance drones for the dormant infrastructure on Earth, then they aren't exploring. They are checking the systems. They are waiting for the mothership to arrive. And now, the mothership is parked next door. The existential threat is that we are living on top of a dormant factory and the foreman just walked onto the job site. The clock is ticking. The 45-day timeline for the Mars Tower to become fully operational is counting down. We are no longer alone. We are no longer safe. And we are no longer the owners of this solar system. We are just the tenants, and the landlord has returned to collect the rent. The mainstream media told you it was a comet. They told you it was a rock, but we have looked at the data. Fact 1. We saw the chemical impossibility, the osmium shielding that nature cannot forge. Fact 2. We tracked the impossible braking maneuver that defied gravity. Fact 3. We used the James Webb Telescope to reveal the hidden moons, the drone fleet flying in formation. Fact 4. We watched them land on Mars and activate a buried network. Fact 5. We are watching them build a tower that scans our planet. The macro loop is closed. The mystery is solved. 3I Atlas is not a visitor. It is a builder. It is a von Neumann probe sent by an intelligence so old and so vast that we are nothing more than ants living on a construction site. It is terrifying. Yes, but it is also clarifying. For all of human history, we have fought each other. We have drawn lines on maps and killed for resources. We acted like we were the center of the universe. Today, that arrogance ends. We now know that there are powers in the dark greater than any nation on Earth. We know that the silence of the universe was not peace, it was stealth. The universe is a dark forest. We lit a fire, and now we have been seen. The story of 3I Atlas is developing every day. The 45-day countdown has begun. I will be tracking the growth of the Mars Tower and the response from global governments in real time. If you want to be the first to know when the second key is found, or if the tower opens fire, you need to be subscribed. Turn on notifications, and I want to hear from you in the comments. Look at the evidence we presented today.